today, we're doing it a little different. They will usually come here and give some form of lecture, but we're doing this one a little different. And I'm excited about it. One, because of who the speaker is, but then two, also because of who the interviewer is. So Jimmy is an old friend. He also used to work for the iHub as the director of our community. And he's one of those know-it-alls. There is no question you can ask Jimmy whose answer he does not know. If you come to him and say, oh, the other day I met this interesting guy whose name is this and that, he's like, me and this guy, we go back to, you know, or, oh, I was having this interesting conversation with this bunch of poets about, that poet. Man, that guy, I saw him growing up. You know, just today he was telling us about the diamond industry. I mean, who knows this stuff? Yeah. And actually, when I asked him to host this session, he said, Eric, sawa. And then today he told me, I've read up on Eric. So Eric, I swear he knows you better than you know yourself. Yeah, so I'm really excited and honored that Jimmy agreed to host this session, and I'm now going to pass it over to him.
Thank you, Nekesa. I don't think there's anything I can add to that. That's a fantastic intro. The only thing I can add is that by talking with Eric, the thing I want us to open our minds to is to seeing this, the opportunity that Africa offers. And importantly, just a small thing that you should know is that the average age in Africa is 19. South America is 24, Europe is 46, Japan is 48. So the only guys who are benefiting from migration are the US, because the guys who are coming in are younger. So one of the things that's interesting about Africa is that we're not just being looked at as people who need to be helped, we are being looked at as a future market and future human resource. One of the things that Chancellor Merkel accepted is that because native Germans have a minus 1.6 growth rate, they will need labor in the next 20 years. So the best thing to do is accept high quality people who are migrating into the country. So how do we keep these guys who are going to Europe here? That's the question we are planning to ask. Okay? And Eric is, he's well versed in that kind of discussion. And just to put kind of face, a kind of information behind this face, I'll ask Eric to give us a bit of background in line with this discussion. Eric?
All right. Thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to be back in iHub and So this is the first time I'm doing something in the new space, which is amazing space. So Nekesa, thanks a lot for pursuing and make sure this happens. And it's good that I can share the platform with Jimmy. Now we can bring our offline conversations online. So I'll add a few data points. So if you look at the growth projection globally, Africa, within the next 50 years, is going to constitute about 40% of the world's population. So in the next, by 2050, according to the United Nations, and a few other data points, some of the data says that will be about 30%, some say 20%. But on average, I think that Africa, every 1 in 4 people in the world will be African. Now, if you look at the projection of India and China, so India and China are almost the same population as Africa. But the land mass of Africa is about 10 times that of India and China. As a matter of fact, you can fit India, China, United States, Europe into Africa and still have space for Japan. So what speaks to that is that Africa has a huge landmass and it's going to have the biggest population set. 2 things are going to happen. One is there's going to be a huge rural-urban migration. if we don't build infrastructure into rural areas. So what we have, cell phone networks, road networks, clean water, clean electricity, we have to do this to the rural areas. If we don't do that, a lot of people are going to be forced by necessity to come into urban centers. What that means is that the traffic you see in Nairobi today is a joke, because you're going to have a huge onslaught. Today, if you take most urban cities, there's a phenomenon that happens. And I've seen this in most urban cities I've gone to. There's about between 1 million and 1.5 million people that live outskirts of the main capital. And every day they commute into the capital for economic reasons. So during the day in Nairobi, the population increases by 1 million to 1.5 million. It happens in Accra. I've seen it in Johannesburg. It's happening in most, you go to Abidjan, it happens there. So you have a phenomenon of not just urban migration, but economic migration on a daily and a weekly basis. I'm sure some of you may have relatives who say, I'll come and stay with you for the week so I can do this job, and then the weekend, he or she goes to the village. He leaves on Friday and it's out, right? So that's the first migration phenomenon. The second is the migration into the rest of the world. Because what you're going to see is that there's a part of the population that is going to have first level university education and higher university education outside of Africa. And so you're going to see that around the world, a lot of the academic institutions are going to have Africans as students, and a lot of the brain power that has come out of institutions are going to be African. And then there's a second phenomenon globally, which is unfortunately a lot of the Africans that will try to go into the world illegally. So what we see today, illegal immigration in the US or in Europe, trust me, it's a joke. You're going to have more of that. So, the way I think about it, that's the context. Then the question asked is that, how do we as Africans assert ourselves? And I think that one of the ways we are doing that is sort of this new renaissance that I see in the young African who believe that they can actually explore their destiny in Africa. And part of it is technology, part of it is exposure, part of it is urbanization. So, one of the things that really struck me is that when I was growing up, one of the phenomena about finishing college was you either get a nice job or you leave the country. It was almost like it was a certain thing. Actually, in the final year in college, most people go, there's this long vac, and then there's the best excuse to go work in Europe or in the US. I mean, most people don't come back to graduate. Because in Ghana, I don't know about here, but you have the ability to graduate later. So most people go and that's it, right? But this has changed drastically in the last 10 years, in the last, 10 to 20 years, where more and more Africans, even without college education, believe that they can start expressing themselves by building their own destiny. They're starting a company, start believing in African brands, start understanding that living in Africa it's really an opportunity and not a problem. And we also are beginning to see a shift in the focus of people believing in sort of their Africanness. So I want to go to Kenya, I want to go see South Africa, I want to go to Rwanda, I want to go to Tanzania. So I observe a certain paradigm shift, a certain paradigm that is changing in the orientation of the African. And that is very strong for this generation. And I think that part of that is what I believe is laying the foundation for what I believe will be the positive aspect of this, as opposed to the fact that it's going to be a very negative phenomenon.
Thank you for that extremely elaborate answer. And now we are going to cut up what he has laid out in front of us. So there are two things. There's going to be our perspective on how we can grow, and then there is the status quo and how they should respond, and unfortunately how they are currently responding. Because in order for all of us to move forward, those two things have to be resolved. So one of the things that there was an article 6 days ago on Wired that talked about, why Silicon Valley's money can't solve Africa's tech problems. And the lady who was mostly being interviewed is called Massimo Tua, and she's part of investment firm called Capria, and she's the African director. And she was saying that the problem is the majority of the fund managers are foreigners and are male. And us Kenyans don't have depth in that market. And her being local and female put her at twice the disadvantage. And the thing is that in the next 5 to 10 years, we either have to make it by localizing our funding, or we are toast, especially if you think about the Chinese and the Indians. We'll be toast. So the question is, how do we do it if the Silicon Valley model doesn't work? And India and China are going to come in strong within the next 5 to 10 years. As locals, how should we organize our funding, considering that most of us are still in real estate, infrastructure development, and that's what we are thinking is where the money is?
Okay. Very good question. Very tough questions to answer. And these are the things that I grapple with on my pillow every night. So I'll try to give you some ideas of the way I think about it. I don't think I have an absolute answer. And then I'll tell you about some of my own experimentation. So I think that, first of all, the phenomenon of Silicon Valley is a context. The phenomenon of China is a context. The phenomenon of Europe is a context. The phenomenon of Africa is a context. And unfortunately, Silicon Valley, Europe, doesn't align with the African context. The closest to that is Asia. And that's why it's easy. The Asia, specifically China's foray into Africa, was so sudden that today people in the West are like, when did this happen? How come that today in Nigeria there are about 3,498 Chinese companies in Nigeria? When did this happen? So just from a context perspective, Silicon Valley won't work in Africa, right? Because it's a totally different context. It's not that it's a right context and Africa is a wrong context. It's not that China is a wrong context and Europe is the right context. No, it's because of diversity. We're different. We're on the face of the earth, but we're in different parts of the face of the earth. So that's very important. So the question becomes, how do we define the African context? So, and I have been lucky to be part of the defining of the African context from a technology point of view. Which is that a bit of my background has been one of the early people that introduced connectivity and technology onto the continent. And I actually stumbled into doing this. My dad wanted me to be a mechanical engineer, and the first day I saw a computer, I was like, this is it. And up to now, it's one of the things that we don't really agree on. We still have a bit of argument about it. But, and that speaks to the point that you made that, as an African, your parents define what you become, right? They said, you're my son, you're going to go to school, and you're going to become this. And the minute you decide to define, actually, I realized myself, I didn't define myself. I suddenly realized that I love computers, I love this thing, right? So it was a discovery of myself. I rediscovered myself. And so this is the first thing that you have to overcome, that you have to overcome this cultural context, that your life is determined by your family. And you like some of my startup CEOs, their parents still think they work for a company. Some of them, actually myself, for a very long time, when I started my entrepreneurial life, my parents didn't know that. My mom, I think she figured it out. They thought I'd go work for the company and come back home, but I was working for myself until things worked out. And I can tell a lot of entrepreneurs, they fight this cultural barrier. So it's going to take time. How do you overcome it? I think it's one of those things that takes time, and it's going to come with success. As more and more entrepreneurs become successful, it becomes an in thing. Actually, it's become an in thing already among the younger generation, right? So I told you about the phenomenon of the generational change, the mindset in the generation. So today, if you say you're a startup CEO, it's cool in Nairobi, right? In Accra, it's cool, all right? Now we have to convince the status quo that it's cool. But the status quo will not get convinced until you become successful. And the way you bridge success in this case is that those who have been successful have to then be the bridge for the ones who are coming. And that's why I do what I do. And I believe that in my own little way, I want to be able to, if not at all, let the next entrepreneur who wants to do something be able to master that courage and say, yes, I think if Eric can do it, I can do it too. Or if at least I can be a sense of inspiration. I give you a story. My first startup that I invested in, I didn't actually put money. Here's the story. So I started, when we built Busy Internet, it was a big ISP in Ghana in 2002. And we had this multi-purpose building. We had an incubator, an accelerator. We had a restaurant. We had a bar. It was an amazing place. It was a melting pot of technology in Accra. And I decided that I was going to, one of the things that I've always wanted to do is to create this platform for the next generation of entrepreneurs. So I started something called the Ghana New Ventures Competition, which was a business plan competition modeled after the MIT 50K competition. And the simple reason was that a lot of the entrepreneurs, our education system, when you're an entrepreneur, you go to the education system, it almost switches you off. So I wanted to create this platform where the guys who wanted to be entrepreneurial could actually get that experience and that training. So we did an annual competition, which was backed by a 3-month boot camp. And I did it during this long vac period that I told you about. So instead of summer holidays, guys who are entrepreneurs, we tell them, come to this boot camp. It's 3 months of theory and practicals. And then we give prize money for you, 3 companies. We give 3 of the best companies the money to start the business afterwards. And the practical part of it, what we did was that I brought most, if not all, of the successful CEOs in Ghana. So it's an afternoon like this, the guy will come, he will tell you his story. It's unscripted, and the entrepreneurs will ask them questions. Through that program, 2 gentlemen, Alex and Dennis, they were in Kenyan UST, their final year. They contemplated going to London and not coming back. And then they heard about this competition. And they said, we've been thinking about doing this business. And they decided to come to the program. And according to them, later on, they said that is when they discovered that they were entrepreneurs. So right after school, they started a company. The first company failed. And then they started realizing there was something called SMS. And everybody was using SMS. And they said, this SMS thing, if we can try and figure a way for people to use for business, it could make money. Started a company called SMSGH, which was all about using SMS as a direct way of messaging people. So they started going to companies and saying, if you want to reach people, the fastest and the best way is not email anymore, it's SMS, because everybody is looking at their phone. So they actually started reselling SMS for some global companies that do SMS marketing. That's how they started. Long story short, they invited me to be an advisor. The company went cash flow positive in the 2nd year and then went profitable in the 3rd year. The company today is 12 years old. This year, we're going to turn over about $20 million US. The company is in 4 countries from Ghana. Now, you got to counter this. These are 2 gentlemen who were out of college without any entrepreneurial. Actually, they said that's the only entrepreneurial training they got out of college. And I give this story because part of it is for you to understand that it's possible. So that journey, that story really encouraged me that, okay, so my first experiment actually worked. By the way, this started in 2002. They ended up starting the company in 2005. And fast forward, the company is 12 years old. So imagine, so that's enough 3 years, so 15 years. So part of this experimentation is that it takes time. Certain things takes time. But this is what I call pockets of excellence, right? And so if they can do it, you can do it in Kenya. You can do it in Tanzania. You can do it in Uganda. And that's why I'm still doing what I'm doing.
I'm very upset. People like this, they just make us feel like there's nothing we've been doing. One of the things that I was part of the guys who won, we did a mobile game. In 2012, we won the Pivot East, Mathri Racer thing. And there's something that happened. Well, let me give you the backstories, and then I'll connect. We were going to build a larger platform. Then we decided to release a game on Flash, on the Nokia phone. And, Nokia, we went to Nokia and they told us, oh, I don't think you'll get more than 10,000 downloads in 6 months. And us guys were saying, oh, okay, that's possible. So here's $10,000 for us to be exclusive to the game. We said, oh, no problem. So the game went to the Ovi store. And on the third day, we had 12,000 downloads.
So anyway, sorry to jump in, but the point is that, that's the message, that they could believe that they could do 10,000 downloads and did 12,000. Anyway.
Now, the worst part is, we weren't being paid for the downloads over 10,000. Within 1 month, we were at 50,000. Within 6 months, we had 400,000. After a year, we were at 1 million. Imagine if we had accepted €1 per download. Well, we didn't. So what I came out learning is there are two things that we need to be careful about. One is burnout. Us guys were ahead of the curve. So as part of the three things that Eric was meant to tell us what we need to do, us guys discovered one. Timing is everything. Eric, what were the three things you said startups in Africa need to have?
Billion-dollar question that I'm supposed to answer. So in the world of venture building, up until the last decade, the school of thought was that the one thing that makes startups succeed is the team. So there are three factors. So there is product, market, and team. And a lot of the studies and work that has been done over the years pointed to the fact that team was the most critical factor for success. And then over the last decade, we've now seen a body of knowledge that actually argues that timing, the second T. So the first is team. The second, now the body of knowledge suggests to us, and there's a famous TED talk, can't remember the guy's name now, skipped me a little bit, but that argued that it's all about timing. So if you get timing right, timing supersedes team. But I believe that in Africa, there's a third T, which is tenacity. And I will just try and explain how they interplay with each other. So the thing that is about team is that for any product, for you to be able to build a product, you either need one person or more than one person. But to build a company, you need more than one person, but more than two people, right? So in the world of company building, team is very important. In the world of product building, it could be one person. So you can sit down with your computer and build a product. But if you want to build a company, you need people. And for you to build a company, what really makes a company is when you have revenue. Because there are a lot of people who build amazing products. And one of the things I like about the Microsoft guys, Bill and that whole amazing group, is they say, look, we weren't the smartest people. But we were smart enough to figure out how to sell even a product that wasn't fully developed. Actually, the first product they sold wasn't their product. It was somebody's technology. They just figured out how to sell it. And the fact that they were able to sell it and get revenue, immediately they moved from being a startup to becoming a company. So in the world of company building, team is important. Team determines product, and team determines revenue through company. And for a company to succeed, the argument is that you have to get the timing right. So if you take today's successful companies like Facebook, I mean, how many of you remember Friendly? High Five. There were so many that came before in MySpace. There were so many that came before Zuckerberg. The only thing that Zuckerberg got right was the timing. But he had to stick himself around to get the timing right. So tenacity. So believe in your idea enough to stick around for the timing to work. Now, there's the argument about Uber, that if Uber came about a year ago, it wouldn't have worked. Part of the factors that made Uber work was that the financial crisis, everybody was short of cash flow. And this guy said, well, you have a car, you come from work, you're just sitting at home watching TV. Hey, go do some driving. You don't need to get a license. You don't need to do anything. All you need to do is the same phone that you're sitting down looking at that is wasting money, you can turn it to revenue by using your car. And the same was Airbnb. Yeah, you have a big house. Okay, your kids are going to school. Yeah, the 3 other bedrooms are available. If you let people in, you can supplement your income. So there was a timing factor that made that work. But behind that timing factor is the fact that something had to be built, and that timing had to come right. Now, tenacity is more important in Africa because in the African context, you know, we are operating in an ecosystem that is not fully developed one. So I believe that when it comes to tech innovation, we are 2 decades into it. It's a total lack of support system. There's a total lack of government support, and all this is organic. So I believe that for you to succeed in Africa, tenacity is actually the most important thing. In other words, you must believe in your vision and stick around long enough for the market to mature. So some of you have interesting startup ideas today, and part of what you're thinking is, but there's no market for this idea, or who is going to pay for this idea? So part of it is the ability to stick around and to get to that point where the market is the timing works. It's the same thing that you need to stick around long enough to build the right team, right? So if you don't get the right team, you cannot succeed. So those are my 3 T's when it comes to Africa.
Excellent. Oh, if I'd known this 6 years ago, I would have been a millionaire. But now I'm here.
But it's okay. Now is still the best time to know it.
Oh, I think the problem. Well, we had an excellent team. The timing was wrong, and once you have to put food on the table, and you have the status quo of, your mom asking you. So when you look at a real job, then it reaches a point where you need to say, okay, let me go get a job, and then I'll come back. The problem is if you go and get the job and get trapped into the usual cycles, then you can only watch. But what Eric has said is important because on 2 levels we need to consider. There is the status quo, and one of the things I was asking him is about the Ghanaian, the current Ghanaian president. Is there anybody who watched his speech when President Macron had arrived in Ghana? There are some things that caught my eye, and I was hoping that one day we can have a president who says something like that. And I'll quote. He said, "We can no longer continue to make policy for ourselves, for our continent, on the basis of whatever support the Western world can give us." It has never worked. So we need to get that. We need to soak that idea. It has never worked. Our responsibility is to chart our path, which is about how we can develop our nations ourselves. It is not right for a country like Ghana, 60 years after independence, to still have its health and education budgets being financed on the basis of the generosity and charity of European taxpayers. By now, we should be able to sort our basic needs ourselves. This is status quo, changing how they are thinking. That's the first thing. We need to succeed enough to change how people think. One of the good things about iHub is that the current president of Kenya before he gave his State of the Nation speech, decided to pass by and see what young people are doing. And we were all very hopeful that we would get legislation that is in line with our market. But that hasn't happened because we haven't shown success yet. The other thing is what we call the virtual infrastructure. What Eric was saying, that we are ahead. And the ideas we have, some of the infrastructure is not in place. Like one of the things we couldn't do is we planned to sell in-game things in our game, but Google Pay did not exist then, and there was no in-game. So we were left holding a game that had potential, but the virtual infrastructure was not there. So those are the two things we need to be able to wait for. So believing that, Eric, that you are slightly ahead in being tenacious and waiting for, what should we be expecting? Now that you have a president who is switched on, because I suppose he has seen that it's possible, that means you guys have some successes to talk about, and that the infrastructure is coming in, like you being part of the teams, the cable that came here, the teams, and what that did for us, we all have a good idea. How do we deal with waiting for these things to happen, for the status quo, both leadership and virtual infrastructure?
Another very tough question. So I'll give you a bit of my own ideas and see whether. So I'm very proud of our current president. I think that Africa's our problems are internal. We've blamed the West and we've blamed everybody for many years. It hasn't worked, right? So it just makes sense that you can't expect a different result doing the same thing. So let's try something different. And I think part of this phenomenon that we're seeing is that internalization and taking our own destiny into our own hands, saying we can actually solve our own problems. We can build new ways of using technology. We can take that same mobile that came to us from the West and solve our own problems. We can internalize these things, right? So I totally agree with our president, and I hope that over time we can walk the talk and we can see more support and engagement from public policy and from our political class. But the reality is that if you look at everywhere in the world, the economies that we call the developed economies, advanced economies today, all of them developed on the private sector. Even if you created an enabling environment, eventually it enables private people to start businesses, employ people, create jobs, pay taxes, and that's how it works. And that's why I'm very hopeful that today's generation believe in themselves that they can start and they can begin to create companies is just, for me, I think, the biggest opportunity for Africa to assert itself in the 21st century. And technology reduces the barriers significantly. If you're going to start a manufacturing business, you have to buy equipment. With software, all you need is your brain and computers. And today you can learn most of the programming online. So I believe that the barriers are really low, and we can go in and we can have an impact. Now, imagine that in Kenya, and I think you guys have had some success as well. When we did a team summary cable, the PS at that time, Bitange Ndemo, who I think that is an amazing Kenyan and should be given a lot of credit for what is happening in Kenya today. I'll give you some numbers. In 2006, the 1 megabit of internet in Kenya was about $5,000. In Ghana, it was about $2,500. So you paid twice in Kenya for the same amount of speed. Then Bitange Ndemo assembled some of us, and let's build the submarine cable, which I'm very happy that I got a chance to be part of it. And 2 years later, 1 meg in Kenya was half what it was costing in Ghana. So literally, within 3 years, there was a leap. And this is something that came from public policy. And to be fair, it was a partnership between government and private sector. So, and this is now to my point, that whilst there's a strong emerging private sector, you need that partnership with the public sector. You need the government to create the right environment, to create the incentives, to create the mechanism. So I'll give you a few examples. I think that African entrepreneurs, and this is where tenacity is important, because you are building in a very tough environment. Investors are investing in a very tough environment. In most developed countries, and now even in Asia, when you do angel investing, you write it against tax. So if I invest in your company, even South Africa has that. You can get something called Section J12, where you get about 50% so tax rebate for investing in the next generation of entrepreneurs. Singapore just raised that bar. The Singaporean government said, when the company fails, we're going to give you 50% of the money back. So today, so much angel investing is going to Singapore. And this is with a backdrop that Singapore already has a strong infrastructure that supports early stage companies. So this is a government that wants to expand its economy, and the way it thinks about it is, the way I'm going to expand this economy is by building more companies. And the way you build more companies is by enabling people to invest in startups. And the way you make that happen is by creating an environment for startups to be able to evolve. So when President Kenyatta talked about Kenya is a startup nation, I'm really looking forward to the time when they can start putting the mechanisms for wealthy Kenyans to start getting tax rebates. Suddenly you unlock a lot of capital in Kenya. The reason people are not investing in the startup is, it's very simple. There's stupid guys like me who overlook these factors. But these are real factors. So I have $100,000. I can go buy government treasury bills, secure. I have no risk. The government will pay me every month. I think here, what's this treasury? I think it was 7 or 8%. Yeah. Right? And have inflation, very good inflation rate. I can go to real estate, go find a couple of more of my friends. We come up with more capital. We make 200% profit within 3 years. I can go to the capital markets. I don't know what the latest returns in the capital markets are. And then I have this option of giving my money to this guy who is building something that I can't even touch. So in the cloud, I mean, there's no clouds. I'm building something in the cloud, but I can't touch it, right? So it's hard that we don't create an environment to make it easy for people who have capital to unlock the capital. So there are people who have money in Africa, people who have made wealth. But the role of the government is to create that incentive, not only for startups, but you can also create a mechanism to unlock that capital. So you make investing in startup attractive by creating incentives, tax breaks, and things like that.
Is there anybody of government here? See, so sad. So, you also are part of a team that had something they were calling the open access model. Yes. Which basically says anyone can connect to anyone in a technology-neutral framework that encourages innovative, low-cost delivery to users. Let me say it again. Maybe I was too fast. Anyone can connect to anyone in a technology-neutral framework that encourages innovative, low-cost delivery to users. It encourages market entry from smaller local companies and seeks to ensure that no one entity can take a position of dominant market power. And we also, as part of the AU, have opened up what we are calling the Africa-wide open, one market and free trade zone, and the one visa for Africa. How would these three work to unlock this potential that you obviously have seen, and the rest of us are probably jaded and clouded by the fact that things are not moving as fast as we would like?
Yes, so let's say some positives about government, right? So we don't come across as we don't appreciate anything that the government does. And this is where we should give a lot of props to our political leadership. That finally, the status quo is waking up to the fact that we need to remove the barriers, which are artificial, by the way, that were created for whatever reason. That it should be easy for me. And one of the classical examples, the first time I came to Kenya, it was an overnight decision. And the reason I was able to make it, I didn't need a visa to come to Kenya. I only bought a ticket and I was on a plane here. And for me, that was just beautiful. And someday we can do this in every African country. And for me, that makes a huge difference. and it will make a huge difference for you. Because if you can easily go to another country, you can move there, then you can set up business there, you can interact with people. So I think it's a great thing that the open access model that we did, by the way, the way I got into this was I got a scholarship to Stanford, and this is what I studied. And I became a team that built this framework. And by the way, it's the Teams submarine cable was based on this framework. And when we did Teams, that led to about now 14 submarine cables that have been built in Africa based on this open access model. So it's a model that has been proving to catalyze, as you said, market entry, reduce the barriers, and allow everybody to play and engage in the market. So it's great that we're going to have very soon visa-free access to other African countries. And also we're going to have a free trade and economic zone. This is very powerful. And this speaks to my earlier narrative that I was giving you that. So you build companies in Kenya. But now, imagine how powerful it is that now Kenya can freely trade with South Africa, can freely trade with Ivory Coast, can freely trade with Ghana, can freely trade with Botswana, can freely trade with Namibia. That creates intra-African trade. Today, the biggest challenge we have in Africa is that beyond aid, the amount of trade that Africa does with the rest of the world, purely based on import, is why our economies are suffering. So we have a strong deficit on our exports. But why can't I expand my company to Tanzania next door? Why do I have to struggling to sell to China? Congo next door is 150 million people. Ethiopia is 100 million people. Why is it difficult for a Kenyan company to expand to Ethiopia? That's what you should be thinking, right? That's the way we empower ourselves. It should be easier for an Ethiopian company to expand into Kenya, but unfortunately, the status quo today is different. It's easier for a foreign company to expand into our market than for an African company to expand into our market. So one of the things I'm trying to do with our fund, and I know you're going to ask me a question about Chanzo, is that we're trying to now, I'm trying to get this generation of entrepreneurs to think Africa. Because part of it is that, yes, your reality is that you grew up in Kenya, you started a company in Kenya, you become successful. And most of our successful businessmen say, hey, Hakuna Matata, I'm in Kenya, this thing is working, I'm making money. Why should I go to Tanzania? Please, let's stay here. And that's why we don't build multinationals. We don't have big companies. Right? So the next generation, one of the things I'm trying to push is to get this generation to start thinking Africa-wide. And hopefully, by the time these companies start growing, there's a free visa system. There's a free economic zone. So you see how the game can change very quickly, and Africa could become the most interesting continent in the 21st century? Please have hope still. I'm still hopeful.
Thank you for encouraging me, because we do need that kind of vision. But there's an area that we haven't solved yet, and that is cross-border payment. Because there'll be no point of having 54 currencies that you need to resolve every once in a while when you're doing business. But I've noticed that there are two different ways of thinking about it. There is Equity that has decided to have a fintech company. And through that fintech company, they have opened their mobile network through APIs, and you can ride on their banking system to have payment. They recently bought out some Germans who are in DRC and are now part of the banking system in DRC. If you think about it, DRC is, I don't know, maybe 10 years behind us before we got our teams and before we got M-Pesa. So they have that advantage. They've also connected with WeChat and Alipay so that you are able to make purchases straight from China. That's one side. The other side is the Opera browser. Because of the spread of feature phones, Opera browser is the most dominant browser in Africa. And in the process, they opened an office here and launched a platform called OPE. And now they have recently, I think it was last week, gone into cryptocurrency. so that they, through their browser, can be able to resolve payment across Africa as fast as possible. So the market is there, but there are two ways of playing it. The thing I'm finding interesting is, considering that Chanzo Capital is in this space, how do you see that playing out? That's because I now can't ask the one I was going to ask. And what are you going to build through that? Because that's going to be a very interesting space, considering now Visa, MoneyCard, and all these other guys are trying to crowd us out.
So that problem is a problem that could have been solved long ago. And I think the financial institution missed a big opportunity. And now they're realizing, oh no, the technology companies are going to do it. Probably one of them, and probably I'll just mention one name, EcoBank has something called rapid transfer, where the markets in which they are, it's easy for you to transfer money between those accounts. It's very simple. But for a long time, they were rent seekers. The banks would charge you so much to move money around. And one day they woke up and realized that, oh no, MTN is in all these markets. They have mobile money, and they can allow people to start sending money within their networks. And you know, one of the things that made MTN successful is that in South Africa, they lost the battle to Vodacom in South Africa. And then they told themselves, why are we fighting in South Africa when we could go into Africa? So MTN, they made a decision, the dawn of the early part of the 21st century, to go into Africa. And today, MTN is one of the biggest multinational businesses in Africa. And now they command a network that is bigger than some of the banks. And now with mobile money, they can easily enable cross-border payments. And so I believe that there are examples that show the way forward. And even in Kenya now, 2 years ago, is it a year ago that you have now interoperability? For a very long time, you couldn't transfer money between two networks in Kenya. This is where mobile money started. Why is that the case? In Ghana, we have it there now. You have it, because once you have the interoperability, and these networks are in different countries, that's it. Right? Of course, Opera is smart. They see an opportunity. They see that, okay, we can do it through the browser, so they're also in the market. And you're seeing a lot of smaller companies. So one of my companies, Haftel, we have now in the 4 markets in which we are, we're able to do transfer within our own network, because we have all these small businesses that use our system, so they can transfer money to each other. Unfortunately, I picked up some news whilst I've been in Kenya that there's new legislation to now regulate peer-to-peer transfer. I hope it doesn't happen, which would be quite unfortunate. But you see, the thing with technology is that the innovation is at the edges. By the time you start regulating this thing, it disappears into the gray market. Today a lot of our policymakers and regulators think that Bitcoin is not happening in Africa. The biggest transactions every day in Africa is happening on Bitcoin. The biggest money transfer, remittance, is happening on Bitcoin. You'll be blown away by the amount of transactions. You think mobile money is the biggest transactions? It's all in Bitcoin now. And it's happening right here in Africa. So the beauty about technology is that when you try to suppress it, it disappears into thin air. And you don't see it anymore, but people use it. So anyway, I hope that the regulators will not do themselves the disservice of, because Kenya was an example for mobile money. Today, mobile money, M-Pesa, was a game changer. I was here in 2000. By the way, in 2007, during the election, it was a very phenomenal and historical moment in Kenya, by the way, because this was the time that the nation was burning down. We were busy connecting Kenya to the rest of the world, building the submarine cable. And as a result of that election violence was what M-Pesa took off, because people were stuck in their homes and they needed to do transfer. So M-Pesa became the way to move money. So Kenya has been a trailblazer in certain ways, and I hope that you don't fall back, and you can be a champion in other ways and other technologies.
Thank you very much, Eric. By the way, I hope you guys are keeping your questions intact. This is the last question I'm asking Eric, so you guys better be ready to ask him all those nice things. I normally know that us guys take some time to warm up to asking questions. So while I'm asking mine, I hope you guys will be ready with yours, because you can't let a mind like this just walk out of here scot-free. He has to earn his keep here. So one of my last question, I was looking at the global innovation index. And there are 3 areas that Africa can innovate and possibly overtake the world. These 3 areas are agriculture, because we need to find a way to feed ourselves post-agricultural revolution that has now created all manner of problems with monocultural products. Education, we have the youngest people, and we still are the least educated, or the ones with the least amount of infrastructure to educate. You can read about something called village education, where people reach a point where they collaborate among families to educate their own children. It's happening right now in Uganda. And of course, technology, and how technology can be used in the other 2 to create products that don't exist yet in the world. Okay, those are the 3 areas. Eric, surely you must have seen that you can be part of some of these things. What are you currently working on, if in any of those things? And what you are not, can you give us tips on what we can work on ourselves, so that, we can join you on later?
So I will give you 3 companies that I've invested in and why I invested in them, and hopefully we'll answer the question. But I'll precede that with an anecdote. So I believe that there is the whole disruption, big technology, Africa, mobile money. So I'm a big fan of that. But I also believe that technology is an enabler. So I believe that one of the ways that we can unlock the value of agriculture is using technology. So one of the companies in my portfolio is a company called Farmerline. I don't know if you've heard of the company Farmerline. Yeah. So these guys, very simple idea. So they said, look, when you go to rural areas, all these farmers have phones. But the phone, they use it to talk and gossip. So how about we now enable them to use the phone as a productivity tool? And then they said, well, most of them are illiterate. So they built a voice prompt interface for a farmer to be able to get access to information from their phone in their local language. That's it. And today, they serve about 2,500 farmer cooperatives across 12 countries in Africa. The company became profitable after 5 years of operation. 2 years ago, we did a study to look at the communities where the farmers use our technology. And guess what? The impact on the incomes in those communities was 100%. In other words, if you take 2 farmers, one doesn't use a system, the other one uses a system. 3 years down the line, this person is earning $2 if they were making $1 the year before. And nothing has happened, the same phone they have in their hand. Now, they can harvest better, they can get access to weather information, they can get access to market. Now, the middlemen they can negotiate better with the middlemen because they know, a tuber of yam costs 5 shillings in the market, not 1 shilling that the middleman make me believe, and even he's negotiating with me on that. Just by looking at the food, you know, in the market, this thing is 5 shillings, so I'll sell it to you for 4. Simple access to information. Right? So what you're just doing here is that you are digitizing the ag value chain. And now there are companies like AgroCenter that now provide a marketplace for buyers and farmers for sellers and farmers to interact so they can buy the product directly. And I give you a few more examples of entrepreneurs that are using mobile in the ag value chain. So think about it. You could find something in the ag value chain and build a simple technology that will work. Yours may not be a big disruptive technology, blockchain. You can use blockchain to do that. Blockchain is just a technology. Bitcoin is just one of the manifestations of that. The second company I'm going to tell you is, so this Farmerline is in Ghana. The second company I'm going to tell you is a company in Kenya. We now rebranded it to FinAccess. So these guys basically built an algorithm that takes your mobile money and mobile phone activity and generates a credit score. And then they provide lending on the back of that. This is what I call second generation mobile money innovation. So mobile money is now infrastructure based. And now they figure out that by looking at your mobile money activity and your top up and all that stuff, they can actually generate a credit score and provide lending. And the reason I backed this company was that last 2016 when I met them, they were making 98% repayment. The banks cannot do that. The bank's default rate is about 20 to 30%. Their default rate was 2%. So that told me that the algorithm was picking the right data points and making the right lending decisions. I told the guy, you know what? Very soon the regulator is coming after you because this will be making money. So what you need to do is become a lending platform. And then you go to all the circles and tell them, hey, you have all these members, you use pen and paper. They have phones. You can give them a simple platform. And now that's what we've become. And that's why we rebranded the company. So it's a simple idea, but it's very powerful. There's a lot of circles in Kenya. Actually, when we studied the circle market, this will blow your mind. The circle market controls about $5 to $7 billion in Kenya. There's money in this market here. There's about $5 to $7 billion that the formal banking system doesn't see. It's in the circles. The small loans and savings companies that you see around, their names are on matatus, I see them on matatus. That's where I see all the names. I mean, I've seen St. Mary's circles. So I've seen all kinds of circles on matatus. But they control a lot of money. So basically what this company is using technology to enable, create efficiency. They can access their members. And now they've built a front-end interface. So that's the second company from Kenya. I'll give you a tech example, which is a very simple company in South Africa that is basically doing grocery delivery. So now I want to cater for the middle class. So the biggest challenge that our middle class has today is constrained with time. So you and your wife, your husband, you both work, but you have kids, you got to get groceries. You don't have that luxury of working the market. So now this guy says, yes, whilst you're sitting in your office, doing your lunch break, just go on the app, tell us what grocery you want, where your house is, and it will be delivered to you. So this is a classical solving a convenience problem for the middle class. And Africa's middle class is growing. Today, according to McKinsey, Africa's middle class is about 300 million. And if you look at the threshold of the poverty line, what you actually see in that structure is, yes, the rich are getting richer, but you are seeing more and more people coming out of poverty into the middle class. And that structure of the population set needs a lot of technology to do very simple things. Another company I'm involved in is a company called Forhe in Ghana. Basically do laundry via an app. So you want your laundry done, you go into the app, you tell them what laundry you want, and then basically leave it with your security man at the door. They'll come pick it up and do it overnight and bring it. You don't have time to go do laundry. Somebody can use an app and do laundry. So there's a lot of simple things that you can do using technology that adds value. Right? The middle class will pay for it because I don't have time to go and be doing laundry. But I can pay a little bit of money for my laundry to be done for me. So I hope those give some ideas.
Hi, thank you very much, Eric, for your insights. My name is Adero. I have entrepreneurial ambitions myself within the technology sector. I've not started yet, but I've been visiting a lot of accelerators and attending a lot of talks. And it seems that in Africa, they're only looking for startups that are solving diseases and just really, painful things, it seems. There's been more of a focus on really, really big challenges. And for me as an entrepreneur, I'm really interested in implementing solutions that are fun, dating apps, social media apps, perhaps our own Facebook here in Africa. But there doesn't seem to be a lot of interest from the investor community. And so I would like to, pose you this question. What do you think that Africa is ready, to see more social fun apps like Tinder and Facebook, homegrown on the continent? Thank you.
We take some more questions.
My name is Harry. I'm the CEO of Patagrao.
Patagra.
Yes. It means find a ground in Swahili, an app that enables you to locate a sports facility within your vicinity. So I'm one of those that went abroad, came back. Those you went with are still there. And I've worked for some time before coming up with this idea. And I'm sort of having the same problem she's talking about, investor confidence, because ours is also sort of a social app of sorts. Yeah, so just to reinforce that.
So will you take 3 and then, or you can handle more?
3 is fine.
Hi, Eric.
Hello.
I was super excited to come to this talk. In fact, I sort of sneaked out of work, but I was still working, so don't worry about that. I'm a consultant, and so a lot of what you're talking about, investment across ag value chains, etc., makes sense to me. But my specific questions, I'm also a founder of an edtech company. So I specialize in taking kids to the best colleges in the US, so Ivy Leagues, other schools like Stanford, Duke, etc. So my first question, and this is something that I've been grappling with, and it could be a fact of balancing work with entrepreneurship, but that's the journey, is how do you source, build, and maintain a team? Yeah, especially more so on the talent side. How do you get that talent? And then the second question is for you now, specifically as an investor. What do you look for before investing, when investing into a company? And this is coming out of the fact that scanning the African investment market, it's becoming much clearer that we are having more external investors than indigenous investors, and particularly on that, we have very, very few angel investors. So, yeah.
Okay, 2, 3 very good questions. So I'll take these 2 together. In terms of the market dynamics, the space in which you are, actually you have sort of a unique challenge. And that unique challenge is in the fact that the middle class, growing Generation Z guys that you are targeting have what I call an acquired taste. So we like to be on Facebook than to be on the local, version of Facebook if you built it. So, and I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that. I'm just saying that the market that you are targeting has got an acquired taste. So your challenge is, and I believe this is where you could make a difference. And I'll use an example of a company. So, Uber is, when we come to this whole, sharing economy, Uber is one of the big companies. In the Middle East, the biggest company is not Uber. It's a company called Kazem. In Dubai, Kazem is the biggest company there. You know what they did? They looked at the Uber model and then looked at certain unique challenges that the Middle East has, and then built that into their app. So in the Middle East, for example, you can order an Uber for someone at a certain time. So Kazem allows me to do, sorry, not Uber, I use Uber as a term, but the Kazem platform allows me, so I can order an Uber for him tomorrow at 7 a.m. to pick him from his house. So because of that, most people use Kazem in the Middle East than they use Uber. In the Middle East, in some parts of that part, women are not allowed to drive. So they build an interface for you to be able to order, and they authenticate for the female gender. So what I'm saying is that they looked at Uber, which is a global phenomenon, but they figured out that we can customize it into a context because there are certain realities and things that Uber wouldn't understand because they don't understand the culture and the dynamics of the society. So think about that. So there are all these dating apps, but they all are not built to solve some specific dating challenges that Kenya has. So if you want to build it in Kenya, look for that and become the one who solves that problem. Suddenly people will go to yours because it's a dating app, but probably in Kenya, people like to date anonymously. So you build anonymity into it. I'm not saying that, I'm just saying, right? So figure out what is that unique thing, or what is that cultural nuance that you can solve that Facebook's dating app will never be able to figure out. They may get it eventually, but by the time they get it, you've already captured the market. Because that's the only reason I would then use yours, because you do something unique that I don't get on Facebook. So though I have an acquired taste, Facebook taste, when it comes to dating, I'm like, your app, Charlie, allows this thing, this is, yeah. So think about it that way. And for your platform as well. It's hard, but when you apply yourself, and part of this is, for a startup, part of this is you have to listen to the market. You know, and this is, I'm not criticizing startup, but this is a function of sort of we growing up, right? A lot of the startups, we build stuff looking at ourselves, right? And normally that's the way it works. So you build something that is going to work for you. But after it started working for you, think about the person you're building it for. So you have to almost start switching to listen to the market. Sometimes some of the apps, right, it's just even a function of the UX. So you have the right app, but the user interface that you've built is what is not making it work. Sometimes it's certain colors that you use. So sometimes it's very, very simple, easy things that you tweak that gives you an edge. So, and those things, you can only figure them out when you spend time listening to your customers and understanding what the customer is always talking to you. You're not listening because you believe this is the product. And you know, the difference between companies that succeed and companies that fail is very simple. The ones that listen to the customer always wins. That's it. The customer will pay for it. So immediately you sing their tune, the customer will win. That's the difference. The last, so however, it's a tough question. It's a tough answer, but sorry, I forgot the team. How do you build a team? How do you? And then there was a first one before that. Okay, so I'll answer both. So I'll give you mine. So building a team is the most challenging thing in a startup. So first starts with you as an entrepreneur, you have to figure out what you are very good at. What are my strengths and what are my weaknesses? This is how you first start to look for a co-founder. So our human natures are very different. We have different forms and different manifestations. So I've met entrepreneurs that is a very good visionary, but he's also a very good detailed person, understands operations, can do marketing, can write the code. And then I've met people who are very good at writing the code. So if you're very good at that, then find somebody who can do the marketing, somebody who can be your co-founder, who can do the sales, who can manage people. There's nothing wrong with that. So the first part of building a team is you have to do an assessment of yourself and figure out what you're very good at and what you're not good at. And then you use that as a bench. That's your job description for finding a co-founder or a first team member. What is the critical thing that this startup I want to do need that I don't have naturally? And there's nothing wrong with it. If you don't know how to sell to people, go find somebody who knows how to sell and say, hey, let's partner together. I'll give you 30% of the company. That's how you do it. And so once you've decided that, you ask, so how do I find this person? So go into your network. You went to school. If you didn't go to school, you go to church. If you don't go to church, you live in a community. If you don't live in a community, you have family.
You're not in Africa.
Yeah. So basically what I'm saying is that I'm trying to tell you that it's all internal. You know, one of the challenges one of the things that we forget very quickly is that if you look internally, you always find the solutions to your problem. It may not be the exact solution. And this is the thing about finding people as well. So now talking to how I pick entrepreneurs. Right? So answering the second question directly. So at an early stage, the principle is that investors invest in people because it's people that have the idea and people that make the idea work. Right? So the primary ethos is an investment in you. But what the investor is really struggling with is that you paint a certain picture, right? You project a future. You said, I want to build the dating app that will have 1 million Kenyans dating in a certain way, right? And it will be very profitable. The investor is just saying, can this person do that? Does he have the ability to realize that? So what an investor looks for is, what is the core skill that you have? And the second thing they're asking is that, how do you augment for the skills that you don't have? So, and this is where it's important for you to be honest with yourself first and be honest with the investor. Because almost invariably, the investor will figure it out. So you say, hey, I want to build this amazing dating app. I can write a technology, but I don't know this. So I'm looking for a co-founder who knows the dating world. Immediately, the investor knows that, okay, this person knows his strengths and weaknesses. So the investor says, okay, maybe I can help you find that co-founder, right? So you get it. So but as opposed to trying to tell them, oh, I can do it all, I know the dating world, and he'll ask you a few questions that you can't answer. So the first thing is that if you want to be entrepreneurial, yes, you have to start by yourself. But you don't have to have everything. This is where a lot of people kind of get caught, that you think because you're starting alone, you have to be able to show that you can do everything. You actually have to show that you can find the people around you to make it work. The biggest companies in the world are people entrepreneurs who surround themselves with the people that can help them achieve their vision. And it's always start with you first saying, what can I do and what can I not do? And then you set out there to find the people that you can work with. And invariably, you will see that the people that invest in you also realize that I'm not only putting money, but I'm also helping this entrepreneur realize their vision. And to the final part of the question. So yes, unfortunately, there's a lack of supply of capital. And I think we talked about a lot of the reasons. But I think it's changing. The reality also is that we are having more foreign capital coming to the market than local capital. And it's because the foreign investors are catalyzed. We are not catalyzing our local capital. So my point is that we shouldn't blame the foreign investors from coming to invest in Africa. We should blame ourselves for why is it that, you think about the wealthy Kenyans, there are wealthy Kenyans in Kenya. So what can we do to make those people invest in startups? It's what we should be thinking about, instead of blaming foreign investors from coming to Kenya. I give a few ideas. For example, some of the ultimate phenomenon around this is that when some startups become very successful and they become big out there, then of course the floodgates opens, right? It's like, oh wow, this guy's made 10 billion building this company, But we haven't gotten there. But until you get there, this is where government becomes a catalyst. This is where the things like giving tax incentive to wealthy people for investing in startups becomes important. This is where giving tax breaks, because you see, by doing that, you actually achieve the economic growth that you're talking about. So this is the places where, as I said, when President Kenyatta said he wants Kenya to be a startup nation, I'm waiting for some of these incentives to kick in. Because if these incentives kick in, there's wealthy Kenyans that will invest in Kenyan startup. The only difference is that the guy wakes up, I have $100,000 to invest. I can buy treasury bills, or I can give it to a startup. The startup is too risky.
When they look at is, like, for example, they they actually quantitatively, so they like churn out the qualitative things like teams and quantify it. Yes. I don't know how they do it, but for you specifically, what do you look for?
Well, I cannot tell you everything today. But I was kind of hinting you a little bit that, so most of the time I spend is getting to know the entrepreneur and try to do that sort of validation or being able to sort of quantify it and make it tangible, right? And that is, it's an ongoing process, because you see, the reality is that you cannot know somebody in 2 weeks, in 3 months. Even your closest friend that you've known since childhood, you still discover things about them. The question is that an investor will just have to get to a point where they become comfortable so that they go over the hump. And part of it is what you, the entrepreneur, needs to do is to make that information available, make it easier for the investor to make that assessment. The reason a lot of entrepreneurs sort of cave in is that you feel that, oh, there's certain things that I'm not good at. I have deficiencies. So if you see that deficiency, you may not invest. And actually, it's the wrong way of thinking about it. It's okay if everybody has deficiency, including that investor. Me, I'm saying there are things that I'm not good at doing, and I know it very well. Right? So there's nothing wrong with you getting an investor to figure that out. What is important is for you to be able to show how you are able to fix that deficiency you don't have. And then that gives the investor comfort. And then it becomes easy for him or her to invest. So this is after the person decides, I want to invest, right? But for the person to decide, I want to invest, like I said, there are other micro factors, some of which are outside your control. So, to conclude that question, I believe that African entrepreneurs are working against all odds. Like, it's really hard for you to leave the US or wherever you were before. I'm sure you were doing a much better job, had a better life, and you want to try do a startup, and it's hard. But this is where you need tenacity. This is where you need to hang in there till the market comes around, because it's going to come around. I really believe that, the latest version of this is Asia. Africa is what Asia was 20, 30 years ago. Just 20, 30 years ago, people will not go to Asia. The reason that a lot of Americans went to Asia, people like Jim Rogers, was when the dot-com crash happened in 2000. And people like him decided that, oh, this party is over, and then they moved to Hong Kong. And within the last 30 to 40 years, Asia has become what it is. Today, the biggest tech deals, by the way, are not happening in the US. In Silicon Valley is a big marketing scheme. But the biggest deal last year was the SoftBank investing in the AI platform of the company that bought Uber in China. What's the name of the company? Didi. Yeah, it was a $12 billion investment. That was the biggest deal. And China is what it is 20, 30 years ago. So I am very confident that it's going to happen in Africa. That is not a question. If you look at all the demographics, if you look at all the factors, it's going to happen in Africa. It's just a matter of when, and it's a question of if you stick around long enough. So hang in there. There's some seats out here. And we welcome your questions. So three questions, and then I'll do something interesting, because I like the questions being asked, but I won't tell you what I'm doing. Please answer.
Hi, my name is Alan Tolo. I'm a CEO of a startup company. We have gone through the product market fit, and we intend to launch 1st of September. So, interesting statistics. In the last 1 month, I have made 10 applications to various funding organizations. Through the reading, 90% I've learned that 90% of all funding goes to foreign-owned companies in Kenya. But that's not the point. Distinctive part of most of those VCs or angel investors, especially foreign, they ask you about your IP and patenting. Whenever you're at iHub, Nairobi Garage, NILAB, and you've noticed, I've not said anything about my company, only that it's an agri-tech. Why? Because you have to keep it hush-hush, unless somebody next door, next to you, like this friend of mine, yeah, grabs the idea, locks 4 developers, and before I hit my 1st of September, it's in the market. I'm like, Zuckerberg, that's, okay? We all know, I'll try and be civil, but let's just say that there is a very big telco in Kenya that has been accused of, yes, of stealing so many good ideas, the latest being last month, if you read, yeah? So here is my question. Oh, sorry, let me add. I've tried investigating about these IPs and patenting. Apparently, like the Superman in IPs is a professor at Strathmore. To get him, like I'm on a waiting list, yeah, right now. If you go to the government, it's what, Kipri or something, yes. First, you have to be afraid that whatever you write down, somebody will be given the same document and dash to make your solution. And of course, secondly, the laborious government processes. In your position and your experience, what's your opinion?
Okay, so that's another big elephant in the room. Very big elephant. Part of this challenge is that we're in the markets that are inefficient, and the inefficiencies of the market slide in favor of certain actors. And unfortunately, some of those actors could behave a little bit differently that will create a win-win situation for everyone. But unfortunately, when markets are immature and there are inefficiencies, some actors behave differently from other actors. So we have to deal with it in that context. And I have access to a few people here in Kenya. We've had those conversations, and hopefully things will change with time. But the reality is that what do you do within that context? So a few ideas that we're doing with some of our startups. And IP is a very important part of this. Actually, the biggest tech deals in the world are valued based on the intellectual property. Fortunately, Kenya doesn't have a strong hold on IP developed in Kenya, so you can actually domicile it outside of Kenya. Unfortunately, South Africa is not the case. South Africa has a very strong hold on IP that is developed in South Africa. So taking IP out of South Africa is a big challenge. The same way foreign exchange controls in South Africa are so hard that some of the wealthy South Africans, it's just a challenge for them to get money out of South Africa. So begin to think about domiciling outside of South Africa. Sorry, outside of Kenya. I can give you some ideas. One of the things that we do with the company we invest in is we help them restructure the organization of the venture to put the IP, the technology brand in a different entity and have different operating entities and create a structure where when you want to exit eventually, it's easy for you to do the exit. Actually, one of my companies said we're going through that as we speak. Today, I spent half of my day signing documents and doing that kind of stuff. So there are some solutions, and I'll be happy to give you some ideas. Your first part of your question, I've really come to believe that entrepreneurship is a contest of execution, not a contest of ideas. And I know it took me a while. I used to believe that it's a contest of ideas. And some part of me still believe that, by the way. It's a part of me that still really believe that it's a contest of ideas. But what you come to realize is that when you start executing your idea, the reality is that people will copy it. What is important is your ability to execute that idea and to be ahead of the market. So I have prided myself in backing entrepreneurs who are saying, well, I'm going to be ahead of the game. So I'm going to set the pace. People can copy, but by the time they copy, I'm one step ahead. And I think that's how you become an eventual winner. You become a market leader. So a little advice to you is, yes, I'm not saying don't protect your idea. But I would say think more about how can you be ahead of the game. Because even when you build an IP and you deploy it today, people will see how it functions and they'll copy it. But then, by the time they get here, you are ahead. And most of the time, you see that that's what will distinguish you in the marketplace, is your ability to understand the customer and your ability to understand meeting the customer at their next. So it's almost like the customer takes a step, and by the time they get there, you are there. They take the next step, and then you are there. So anyway, I hope I help you out a little bit.
We've got like 10 minutes. So those are the last questions.
Okay, thanks a lot, Eric, for the insights. I'm Samuel. I don't have a startup yet, but I'm in the process. I'm working on testing some projects. I should be releasing a service soon. So I think in learning about startups, one has the understanding that it takes a very long time to break even for the business to be profitable. I think probably you mentioned that 5 years is pretty fast. So my question is, why is this the case? Is it maybe the fact that, okay, even when the business seems to be making revenue, making sales, yet it takes very long to be profitable? So is it maybe a challenge with bringing down costs? Or is it maybe that it gets very difficult for startups to find ways of bringing down costs? And what are these costs in the first place?
I would like to take that question right away because it's a very, very important question, which is the inner workings of your financial model, which will derive from your business model. So let's assume for a minute that you have a business model. What I tell a lot of startup founders is that this is the primary thing you should be thinking about. How do I increase my revenue whilst decreasing my cost of acquiring customers and operating the business? This is fundamental. The minimum is to try and keep your costs horizontal whilst increasing your revenue. Now, generally, the pattern is such that there are certain technologies or there are certain business models that work tangential to this. And you will put those in a totally different bracket. So if you take the Facebooks of this world, the social media platforms, etc., it works on a different business model. That model assumes that you create an audience and then you monetize the audience later. But that means that you need to have deep pocket investors who believe in this phenomenon of there is no money and then one day we all become billionaires. And the hit rate in that is like 1 in 300 or something like that, right? So what I encourage entrepreneurs is think about the model where you can start making money now. And this is, again, speaking to you from within an African context. Because, and this is where I started by saying this, Silicon Valley is a context, and Africa is a context. Because you're in a context where there's a scarcity of capital, not a lack of capital, but a scarcity of capital, it's good for you to start thinking of your business model in a way that, how can I make money from the first customer? Because that also gives you validation with investors. The company that I was talking about, the Kenyan company I invested, before I invested, they were making 98% repayments on their loans. So for me, it was clear to me that they were doing something right. They were making money. They knew how to give loans to people and get 98% of them to repay using technology. For me, that was phenomenal. It says it all. Then I got to know the entrepreneur some more, and I figured that, and this was, by the way, this was his third startup, so he had an experience in 2 startups. So now let me kind of address your question, is that think about it from the perspective of how do I quickly get into a business that I can start making money very quickly. And so the first thing you want to address as a startup is cash flow. Now, when you've sorted out your cash flow, your second thinking is now getting to break even. And that's where the cycle I mentioned to you now starts becoming what you think about. So initial cash flow reasoning is that, yes, your initial customer acquisitions may be very expensive, so you're burning a lot of cash. But you want to make sure that you also bring in enough cash to at least pay salaries and keep the lights on. And once you figure that model and that model is working, then your next thing that you want to think about is, okay, now how do I now minimize the cost of acquiring customers, running the operations, right? And sometimes you need to do that alone, or you need to do that at the same time of increasing your revenue. So you will see that they will meet at a certain point. It's either they meet this way or they meet that way. And at this point, it's break even. And in certain businesses also, you will stay break even for a while, because sometimes it's a function of you've been able to acquire a critical mass of customers that you are basically providing services to. So they consume this service over time. You've mastered that cycle. So you may stay break even for a while. And then in certain cases, that's when you want to raise money, because now you say, okay, I've now figured out my cash flow model. I've now figured out my break even model. Now, I can't actually fund this internally, so I want to now pivot. I want to do my next leap. And that next leap, and it varies with businesses, it may be that you have to fine-tune your technology, or you have to hire more people, or you have to change systems and processes, right? And that requires a certain level of capital. So now my final advice on raising money is, the first money that you raise, make sure that that is the money that actually at least gets you a product, something that somebody can play with. If you can actually build that product without raising money, even better. Because you see, when investors realize that you have skin in the game, and that's what we call skin in the game. So you don't only have an idea you are telling me. You said, you know, I had this idea, but I've actually built a prototype. At least I have something to show you. Then you get the attention of the investor, not because eventually we'll look at the Excel sheet and all that. But when you come to me, and again in this example, he had already been able to start making money with the app. Right? So find a way of going beyond, I have this great idea, to I've actually gotten something that you can touch, you can experience. Because it differentiates you from everybody who is pitching. Oh, as for ideas, I got some email, I'll give you some funny story. Somebody wrote me an email and said, I have a great idea that will make like $100 billion, and I want to tell you about it, but you have to sign an NDA first. Wow. Unbelievable. Please don't send that email to an investor. Please don't do that. You know, because the reality is that every idea that you have, please believe me, 10 people have that idea. And actually, 20 more people have that idea before you had the idea. The difference is the one who acts and gets it going. That's the difference. So ideas abound. Actually, even this, if you go around and I think, even today alone, if I ask this lady, you had some ideas, even walking into this room, you will have ideas. Ideas abound.
No, my question has already been answered.
Hello, my name is Victoria, and I have just a very simple question, which is, who is teaching you? So basically, who are your mentors, and what are the upcoming or rising voices in the or industries that you're watching? And then lastly, what books are you reading?
Okay, 3 questions. So one of my mentors is a lady called Esther Dyson. Esther invested in me in one of my first, the GNVC, the business plan competition. I went to her office with my founder then, Victor, in New York. We spoke for less than 40 minutes, and we're walking to the door, and she gave us a check and then banged the door, and then said, I will send the agreement, and agreement never came. And then she said, I don't think this idea will work, but you guys are great guys, and let's be friends. And then we'll be friends till now. So that has had an imprint on me. And it's part of why I also want to be able to back the next entrepreneur. And then the second question was, I want to give simple answers since the questions were simple. So I'm really watching the venture capital industry. So one of my biggest nightmares today is trying to think, how can I help build a VC model for Africa? Because I think it's clear to us that the other models won't work. So what would be the African VC model? And that's why I'm personally building a fund. We were talking about it a little bit. And we're hoping that we'll be able to, and other people are doing this, by the way, I shouldn't take too much credit. Other funds in Kenya, in South Africa, but everybody's trying to experiment. I think, and these cycles take minimum of 10 years, right? So I believe that probably in the next 10 years, we will start seeing certain VC models working. And so that's kind of the thing that, and I study a lot of models. I've been studying models in Asia, I've been studying a lot of models in China, I've been studying a lot of models in the Middle East. I also been studying a lot of Europe and the US models. And I'm getting a sense, so the first thing I think I have a clear sense of how some of those models won't work here. So now the question becomes, what can we make work here? Right, so that's the experiment I'm doing. And hopefully we will be able to, after a few experiments, be able to see what will be the African model. And I generally believe there'll be an African model. It will take time. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, but I have to warn you, I now have 12 startups. At 10, I said I will not do it again because, my drug is very low. Okay. We can always talk, yeah. Anyway, yes, we can talk.
Okay, so this last exercise is to help Adera. And the reason why I'm doing this is so that we can actually think about how we approach problems. Dating is an analog thing. It's a face-to-face thing, mostly. And maybe you might have, maybe one or two people down the road are the ones who are going to connect you. And the problem with the Tinder Western model is the focus on individualism, that you and the other person can just connect as individuals. The problem with the African system is that it doesn't work like that. I'm sure you do know that your own mother would start saying, by the way, where you have reached now, I have seen a nice young man. I think you should talk. But we are resistant to that because, we feel we want to make our own decisions and that kind of thing. However, there are a lot of communities where dating for marriage and not just for social discussions, that's my time, oh, it's terrible, is done through a network. So I want ideas from you guys for Adera. Because Tinder won't work here, period. For obvious reasons, it doesn't work. I need to know who you know so that I can measure, whether it's possible. Unless it's just for exercise. I meet you tonight and then that's it. Is that the kind of...
Although Tinder shows you your mutual social media friends.
The question becomes what kind of community you are social. Considering Facebook says your optimum number of friends is 150. How many people have more than 150 friends on Facebook?
No, Facebook doesn't say that.
No. It's what they said is your real number that you can use. That's why they used to cut it off at 5,000, Bob. Okay. At 5,000 people. So the real people you can really access tops out at 150. You can have 2,000, you can have up to 5,000. Beyond that, you're a superstar and you should have a Facebook page. That's their thinking. Okay? So assuming that this has been proved, You need to have a network that you can rely on, and that's not just simply digital. Okay? How would we do it in Africa? How would we do it? Should you?
I already got some inspiration from you, just listening to you talk at the beginning.
Oh?
I thought of the idea that a dating app in Tinder, a Tinder in Africa would allow for people to recommend, to set you up on dates, to recommend someone to you.
So with those good words, thank you, Adera. With those good words, I sadly have to call this evening to an end.